Welcome to the award-winning Saints Happy Hour podcast. Seriously, this podcast has won awards. American standards are dropping every day. The show features Ralph, the best host in the world, who can barely pronounce his own name, much less anyone else's.
Marcus Callaway.
Dave is that dude who loves taking bathroom breaks. He's mad about almost anything, so make sure to lower your volume when he speaks.
Put that freaking clown meme back up that I made. Jesus Christ.
Andrew has sources, watches tapes, and knows football. He rarely shows up on time and wants to commit crimes to help the Saints win.
Sean Payton would have done illegal things. Don't tell me I'm wrong, because you know it's true.
Oh, and there's also Kevin, who is great at doing mock drafts, but struggles to actually watch Saints games or have a functioning relationship.
Budrich wants to know how the doctor's doing.
That ended.
Anyway, grab a drink, sit back, and enjoy the insanity.
All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Saints Happy Hour podcast. If you're listening to the free version of this show, please go to saintshappyhour.com, subscribe, become a patron. You can get it as low as $7 a month. It's a great way to support the show if you listen to us on the free version. I promise it'll be the best $7 you spend all football season. And you get access to our Discord channel. You get access to every podcast we do. No commercials. People hate the commercials. You get no commercials ever. So you should totally do it. So this show, we got a friend of the program. I wrangled the one, the only, the king of Saints podcast, Ross Jackson. You know him. He's locked on Saints. We listen to him every day. Ross, how you doing? Thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thank you, buddy. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, man. Always a pleasure when I get to chop it up with you and the boys.
So here's my theory. I know we're in July, right? And we're getting ready for camp. And me and you are going to talk all about camp. But I see all the content people like us, and you especially, because you do Locked On Saints. You're like us. You got to do it every day.
Yeah.
So you got to come up with content. And I see people, they're like, oh, this offseason, it's so long. I can't wait for camp to get here. But I have a theory that, Ross, Saints fans, we've been spoiled with the off seasons, because here's the thing. We haven't had a quiet off season since like 2019, maybe.
Yeah,
because
you look a long time.
You think about it. This year, we had, where's Sean Payton going to go? Is he going to get a job? Is the Saints going to are they going to get draft picks? And the Sean Payton coaching search was wild. We had Benjamin Albright going at him on Twitter and just twists and turns. Like we're watching. We did whole breaking news podcasts on Saints Happy Hour of, this is what Sean Payton wore in the pregame on Fox. Does it give us any tips as to where he's going? We did that all of January, right?
Yeah.
So we had that for January. Then in February, we had Mardi Gras week, or what was it? The week Mardi Gras started, the Saints visited with Derek Carr, and the Saints came out and were like, Derek Carr is our guy. We are all in.
Yep.
February, through the combine, was all Derek Carr news to fill the time. And then that's this year. Then you get into the draft and you get into free agency. We're good, right? Last year, Sean Payton retires. Nobody saw it coming. We had a coaching search, right? We had to, then the Saints had to decide who they're going to do, what they're going to do at quarterback. They went after Deshaun Watson. I'll put that aside, whether that was a good idea or bad idea, but that was a whole thing, right? Then in 2020, you had COVID, and you're like, oh my God, the Saints are over the cap. What are they going to do? They're going to reduce the cap. The whole Loomis math thing is out. So that's 2020. So really, the only really quiet offseason they had is 2019. So I think you think the offseason this year was long? Wait until next year if the Saints have a good year and they don't change coaches.
And they're boring.
Yeah, and they're boring. And the only thing we have.
Stable.
It's like, what are we going to do to get under the cap? That's all I'm saying.
Right.
For me and you, that's bad. But as you get and you look at this team, and a lot of podcasts is what can go wrong, what can go right. When you look at the 2023 Saints, when you look at camp, because you're gonna be out there and you're gonna be looking at everything. What's the thing that you're gonna be looking at sort of every day? Because I know the storylines change, but what things you're gonna have always in the back of your mind that's like, I'm looking at this every day, and it's not like we're gonna panic. You won't panic. That panic is my brand. But you'll be monitoring this every day, kind of like, this is a big thing. I'm watching this story every day to see how it progresses, because I think it's important for the 2023 Saints. What's sort of your number one thing in camp you'll be watching every day?
Yeah, the low hanging fruit is Derek Carr, right? Like that's always going to be the number one thing that you're looking. How is he, in command of the offense? We got a really good glimpse of it during OTA's minicamp, and by all accounts, good returns on all of that. But training camp will be another level, right? It's just another level. They get two different examples of joint practices, one in Orange County, California, another here in New Orleans, with Houston coming to town and all that. So that's always that'll be the number one thing. But to move that aside, because that's kind of a given. For me, it's the offensive line. I mean, if we accept the idea that Trevor Penning was supposed to be the starter, was trending towards being the starter week one last season, that would mean that the New Orleans Saints never got their starting five offensive line out on the field for a single snap together, much like their starting five secondary never played a single snap together, for a single snap last season. And so what does the offensive line look like? Not just can they stay healthy, not where's the depth, not all that, which that is still a big part of that conversation, but just the bare bones. Do they work? Does it work? The collection of the five. And so I think that, early on in training camp, we should be getting a glimpse of that. Everything that we've been told in terms of Cesar Ruiz and Andrus Peat, we saw Andrus Peat out there during mini camps, but and Trevor Penning, is that they're expected to at least be around to begin training camp. We've been told that they're going to be good to go for training camp. We'll see if that's if that includes a ramp up and all these other things like we saw with Ryan Ramczyk last training camp. But in any case, we start to kind of get a glimpse of that. And so I think that's the big thing that I'll be watching day in and day out, is how is the offensive line performing, especially July 31st when the pads actually go on. And speaking of July 31st, the trial date, of course, for Alvin Kamara. That's a big storyline we're going to be following.
We're going to have all sorts, like the breaking news siren here be going crazy, because we got Alvin Kamara, we have Trevor Penning and Marcus May. You got him. And my thing with the offensive line, just to sort of micromanage it, and I got the Saints Locked On podcast at Lowe's, and I'm fighting traffic in Houston every day. My thing that I'm going to be paying attention.
You got a lot of traffic.
I got a lot of traffic. I got you every day. I feel like me and you are like best pals, because I'm like, you're in the car. You're in the car with me every day.
I would not disagree, buddy.
Either coming or going home. One of the two. I know you probably like, I'm working hard. I'm like, Ross, I need two podcasts. I need one for the morning.
Hey, 2 days are coming back. 2 days are coming back. That's
right. I need my morning. I need my morning Locked On Saints and my evening. But my thing for the offensive line that I'm going to look at is Trevor Penning, just specifically, because I just look at him, Ross, and I think not that injuries are good during training camps, because we'll freak out about them, but if a veteran guy gets injured, like if James Hurst, just for example, if he injures whatever, and the Saints are like, listen, he's going to be out for a week and he's going to miss practice, we'd be like, whatever. Just as long as he's good, as long as he's healthy, the final week of preseason, and he gets good 2 weeks of practice before the Tennessee Titans, it's fine. But Trevor Penning, to your point of, they say he's going to be ready to go. I just believe he's a guy, he's got to practice. And I'm not even worried about when you say, hey, Trevor Penning practiced and I thought he struggled today, or he looked good. Right. That's even irrelevant to me. I just feel like he's a guy, he's got to be out there every single day. Yeah. And we saw it with Jameis, I think, to bring it back. He missed time with the foot, and we were like, it's Jameis, he's a veteran, he'll be fine. Like, I just think Trevor Penning, if he's not playing and he's not practicing, that to me is the biggest like storyline that I'm focused in, because you like you said it, like if he can't, I guess my question to you is, what level do you think Trevor Penning has to be in 2023 playing? If let's say he's healthy and he plays, what level do you think he has to be at for you to say successful season? That's looking like a good draft pick. What level do you think he needs to be at?
I think it's got to be better than James Hurst. I think that's really, you know what I mean? That's really what you're looking for. You don't need him to be Teron Armstead. It'd be great if he is. You're not going to be mad at that. You know what I mean? Like, no one's going to be like, oh, darn, he's as good as Teron Armstead. But like, he's got to be better than James Hurst. He has to be an improvement of what their alternative is. But it's not like if Trevor Penning goes out there and, struggles and, you get 3 games in and then you have to turn to James Hurst or something like that. Like at least you have that, but it's not like a situation where you're going to be able to say, okay, no problem. We'll just go get a better left tackle somewhere. You don't have that option. You know what I mean? So he's got to be better than the alternative, and the only alternative are the other guys in the roster. And so as long as he's able to do that, so I think that there's that piece, but the other piece of it is that as long as he progresses throughout the season and we see him get better and better and better and better. So that means that he starts off a little bit better than James Hurst, and maybe he ends a considerable amount better than James Hurst or whatever. Like, you just want to see that. You just want to see the growth. You want to see the trajectory to be upward, and you'd love to see him stay healthy, because that was the other piece. As good as Teron Armstead was, you just never knew if there was going to be a chunk of 6 games where you didn't have him. You know what I mean? And then that pesky, pectoral muscle injury and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, you just never knew. And as good as Teron Armstead is, who's like Hall of Fame level left tackle, in my opinion, or can be if he continues the good trajectory in Miami, then I think, as good as he is, you still worried about whether or not he's going to be available. So if you can eliminate that with Trevor Penning, which, look, dislocated toe injury to start his first year, Liz Frank injury to end his first year, not a great track record so far, but if you're able to get past that and you're able to keep him on the field, then I think that that's really what you need for you to be able to say, okay, successful 2023 for Trevor Penning and the New Orleans Saints.
Well, I just think eventually this injury plague that the Saints have, Ross, it has to lift.
Gotta stop. It's gotta stop at some point.
I was preparing for my WWL like training camp preview. They were like, hey, we need ideas. And I was thinking of quarterback. The Saints haven't had a healthy quarterback start the year and end the year since 2018.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy in bad luck. But the one thing with the Saints that I think is, well, a lot of things are interesting, but the one thing that I look at is, besides injuries that could sort of not derail the season, but make it sort of a really difficult slog to get to above 8 wins, let's say, is I look at this defense. We love Demario Davis, love Cam Jordan, love Tyrann Mathieu, but they got a lot of guys on this defense that are older. And you know this as well as I do, like football players, it isn't sort of this like baseball or basketball where it's, they hit 31, 32, 33, gradual decline. Oh, he's kind of old and washed, and it just kind of eases into football. It's like you decline a little more, and boom, you're done. Like you're either injured and you can't get back, or you just like don't have it. And I would use the example of in 2011, John Stinchcomb. He went to camp with the Saints. You were going to say, and he just was like, he went to camp for like one break. He's like, by the way, I'm done. It's Zach Strief's job. I'm out.
We saw the same thing with Patrick Robinson a couple years ago too.
Yeah, he's like,
I'm good.
I'm good. I got the money. See y'all. But that's the concern. Is like the Saints have an older roster. Who on the defense would you say of the older guys? Absolutely, the Saints cannot have a fall off a cliff. Like, you can only pick one. So what's the guy that you say he's got to maintain or be close to the level we expect him to be?
Yeah, and by older guys, you mean we'll use the 30-year-old benchmark, right? Okay, so I mean, I have to go with the premier position on the defensive side. I got to go with the edge defender and Cam Jordan. Cam Jordan's got to be the guy. I mean, I'm really close to going with Tyrann Mathieu. I think Tyrann Mathieu can be a very, very important piece to this defense, but they have so much athleticism on the back end. There's so many of these guys right now that are on the roster for the New Orleans Saints that are like at the top of their list on like active, passes defense across the NFL and stuff like that. Like they're pretty good. And so when I look at the middle of the field, you look at linebacker, Pete Werner's really talented. DeMarco Jackson's somebody that's really talented as well. Neither of them are Demario Davis. However, linebacker is just kind of one of those lower, I say that with heavy quotation marks, impact positions. Edge defender, that's the guy that's trying to stop the quarterback from throwing the football. That's the guy that's trying to be the first line of defense day in and day out. And then that symbiotic relationship between the defensive line and the secondary gets aided by your ability to generate pressure with the defensive line, particularly with your front four. So with all that said, And then knowing that Cam Jordan effectively right now is, I think it's fair to say, is the face of the franchise. He's, you might be able to slot Derek Carr into that soon, but he's got to play a year first, in my opinion.
That's right.
But that's kind of that's who Cam Jordan is. And he's the leader, not just for the defense, but he's the heartbeat for the team. So I think that's a guy that's got to maintain, right? 7.5 sacks in every season since the 2012 year. 2011 was the one exception, his rookie season, where he had 1 sack.
That's
where they
right.
used a little bit more of like a 5-tech run stopper role. And then they moved him into that pass rusher role. And then he's been lights out ever since. The guy's missed 2 games in his entire career, once because of COVID and the other because of a fractured orbital bone. And Ralph, I'll tell you, they nearly had to fight the guy.
He was so mad last year.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing to see, but I think he's like a 1%er in a sense. I think 99 really out of 100 guys would be like, y'all are like 4 and 9. I broke the orbital bone. I'm going to take a couple weeks. I'm going
to just chill for a second.
I'm going to just chill. Okay. He was heated. He was heated on the Twitter. He's like, they're like, are you good to go? He's like, I'm good to go, but they're telling me I can't go. I was like, wow. He's like spilling the tea on the Twitter out here. He was heated. But the thing is, guys, all sports guys, but especially football players, because everybody knows how violent the sport is. Yeah. That consecutive game sheet, it meant a lot to him. Oh, it did. It meant a ton.
100%.
100%. I'm going to tell you a storyline that I think, and this is, we straight out borrowed this from you. You put it on Twitter. Good. You said, what storyline are we sleeping on? And I did it on a podcast, and I want your thoughts on mine. I think we're sleeping on the special teams in a sense of.
I heard you say this. Yes. It's such a good pick.
They were dreadful last year. Will Lutz, if you go by advanced statistics, he's the worst kicker in football, right?
If you go by base statistics, he's the second worst, right?
Like
74.1%.
Yeah, right.
Like there's no saving it.
And Gillikin was amazing as a rookie, but he was bad last year. So I think I think Will Lutz is the favorite, and I think he'll have to lose the job. But I think kicker and punter is something that we're going to watch. And, it may not be a thing where they make a change for week 1, but tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think kicker and punter for the Saints have an incredibly short rope. Like, I think Will Lutz, his sort of, you're the veteran guy, you've made a bunch of kicks for us. If you struggle for 3-4 weeks, we're going to let you work through it. I believe his bank account now is empty. I think he's going to be kicking he's kicking for his job in the preseason, and he's kicking for his job early in the year. Like, he struggles at best. He's going to be kicking for his job on a Tuesday.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. And I do think there's a legitimate battle to be had at kicker between him and Blake Grupe, the undrafted free agent that they brought in from Notre Dame. They like the guy a lot. The guy's like 5'7", 160, and is just like the teeniest, tiniest guy out on the field. It's like watching Deontay Hardy kick field goals, right? Like it's that stature. But man, he can boom him. He can boom him. And so like they like him a lot. But I think you're right. I think that there is a gap between Will Lutz and Blake Grupe that is considerable, and that it would be Will Lutz's job to lose. But I do think that we start to see a little bit of like the length of the leash on these guys, the length of the rope on these guys is akin to what it would have been with Sean Payton, right? Sean Payton hated kickers that missed field goals. That's why they cycled through like 6 kickers a couple years ago and all that stuff, that the year that Will Lutz was dealing with that injury. And so I think you might see that leash is there, or that short rope, as you mentioned, is there, if there starts to, gather some concern over the course of time. And I think the thing that you want to see Blake Gillikin get better at is pinning offenses back in key situations. He had some beautiful punts last year. He had some terrible punts last year. He had some that he shanked, and he had some that he shanked in really pivotal moments.
That's right.
Like really pivotal moments. And so I think if you can get back to one of the things that made Thomas Morstead so special was his ability to locate the ball in pressure situations, pin you back when your offense is trying to drive, and the Saints defense is protecting a 6-point lead, he's making you start on a 99-yard drive. He's making you start on a 98-yard drive, whatever. That's what Thomas Morstead did so incredibly well throughout his tenure here in New Orleans. You want to see that from Blake Gillikin, and he's going to have a little bit of a competition himself. Lou Headley, the Australian punter that came in, I like to call him the Thunder from Down Under until he tells me he doesn't like it. And I think that he's a guy that's going to come in. He's got a big leg, big time leg. We just need to see the ball location. We didn't get to see a lot of that during OTAs. I think the 2 out of the 3 OTAs we went in the indoor facility. You ain't learning nothing about a punter in the indoor facility. It's not happening. It's not happening. The roof's too low, all that. So I do think that, like, special teams wise, that's going to be big. And that helps the defense, and in turn helps the offense. Like, special teams continues to have all that. So there's that piece of it, but then there's the returner piece of it, the punt return piece, the kick return piece. Can you put Derek Carr and the offense in manageable situations like the special teams unit did against Green Bay a couple years ago in Jameis Winston's first start?
That's right.
That 38-3 game. Like, special teams was such a big part of that on both sides of it. So I completely agree. I think that's going to be a big piece.
And I'm curious to see too with the return game, because Rashid Shaheed, his hype train is I saw rankings.
It can't go any faster.
It can't go any
faster right now.
the great Nick Underhill is like ranking the roster that he's like, he's 13 on my top 20. I was like, wow. I'm like, it's great. It's out of control. But that's another thing I'm going to watch is I'm curious to see if you guys that are out there at training camp are like, Shaheed is so good that do the Saints have a tough decision to make where they're like, man, he's so good, we can't have him returning kicks? Or is he so good at kicks, they're like, we got to let him do it? So I'm going to be curious to see if he takes that leap. Does punt returner, kick returner, does that stay on his list of duties, right?
Yeah, and I wonder how the new kick return rules in particular impact that, right? Like, do you, instead of trying to maximize your return, do you just try to maximize your ability to be able to field the ball cleanly on those kickoff situations, take the fair catch, start at the 25, and then do it? And then maybe you see something on tape in particular matchups where, hey, they cover this in a certain way I think we know how to take advantage of, whether it's, Darren Rizzi and Graziano and these other guys that are like, hey, the masterminds that they are in that area of the game, there's something we can take advantage of here. Let's return. And so maybe that in part kind of impacts that to where you see Rashid Shaheed out there still returning kicks or as the primary kick returner so they can utilize him sparingly. But otherwise, he might just be calling fair catches and taking them at the 25. But then the punt return game, I think, is one to where you're pretty comfortable letting him go for it and then seeing what you can get from it. So I think that it kind of depends upon what that workload ends up looking like and how the rule changes and kick returns impact that. But I think it's going to be hard to keep, especially with Malik Flowers no longer an option, right? They moved on from him. He's the guy that had the FCS all-time kick return record tied with Rashid Shaheed coming out of Montana. He's not on the roster anymore. Doesn't mean that he won't be back, but he's not on the roster presently. So right now you don't really have another option unless you toot the Tay train and let Taysom Hill, get downhill and let him do it, which we've seen success from that before.
That's right.
But I don't think that, especially as long as Michael Thomas and Chris Olave are healthy, that Rashid Shaheed's offensive role will be so much that they have concerns about risking him in the punt return and kick return duties, especially if he's not kick returning a ton. But then the extra compound comes, what if by week 13, one of those guys is down Rashid Shaheed needs to take a larger volume and he moves from being a, all around guy on the offensive side to being your flanker, right? You're off the line of scrimmage receiver that's trying to ward off press coverage and stretch the field. Then all of a sudden he's got a larger role. Do you then have a conversation about how you go about it differently then? So it might change based upon game situation and things like that. But I don't think, at least to start, they'll take any of those responsibilities away from him early in the year.
You mentioned receiver. You were throwing out names. I got to say, like the Saints at receiver, I made a joke that during the Cleveland game when Andy Dalton was throwing and balls were bouncing off of guys' helmets, and I have a feeling that Pete Carmichael, I made a joke that he turned to Dennis Allen. He's like, Dennis, I'm never going through again. Do this again. You got to fix this. And Dennis is like, don't worry, buddy. I got you. They got 14 dudes on the roster. And like Ross, like, I'm not saying they're all going to be great, but Brian Edwards is an NFL guy. Keith Kirkwood, I make fun of him, but he's bounced around. Kiki Kute. Like these guys are, they've been around. James Washington is another one. Like wide receiver is going to be one of the really interesting camp battles because you can only keep so many. I know you got the practice squad. You can bring them up and down, but it's going to be real interesting.
I was going to run to the roster for the 2021 season and just remind everyone what that wide receiver room looked like, but never mind. We're not going to worry about it. Everyone knows.
2021, the receiver room was so bad.
That was rough.
When they signed Kenny Stills, I was excited. I was like,
right.
He can't be that bad. He'll have a little something left. He's a 30, 40 catch guy. He'll be fine. No. He was totally cooked. So that's what it was. They were tired of it, Ross. They're just going to hit all the receivers. They may trade for Hunter Renfrow. But of all those guys on the list, who's a guy that you look at, whether it's, and remember they drafted Perry, right? Mm-hmm. So who's a guy that you're looking at and you're like, ooh, I'm going to be watching him because he's going to be interesting. That's maybe you can count Perry or Washington, but don't count the top guys, Olave, Thomas, those guys. Who's one of these wide receivers you're interested in?
Am I allowed to say Brian Edwards in this exercise? Yeah. Brian Edwards okay? Because I think Brian Edwards is one of the ones that I'll definitely be watching. A.T. Perry's absolutely on there. I'm going to be really interested to see where Lynn Bowden fits in. Do they use him as a running back? Do they use him as a wide receiver? Or is he Ty Montgomery again? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a guy too that they kind of mix in at returner potentially. Yeah. And so he's going to be one of those guys. But Brian Edwards is really the one that I'm going to be most focused on immediately, along with A.T. Perry. I think the big battle between the big bodied guys, which leaving Michael Thomas out of that conversation because there's no battle when it comes to him, but Brian Edwards, A.T. Perry, Shaq Davis, and then I'll throw Traquan Smith in there as being the 6'1", 6'2" or above 200-pound guys. That's going to be, I think, one of the most intriguing battles because there might be 4 of those guys battling for a roster spot, maybe 2 roster spots, maybe a practice squad spot. Right. A.T. Perry probably forces it to be an extra roster spot as opposed to just a practice squad spot. But I think those are the guys that I'm going to really be watching. And the reason why I like Brian Edwards is so much is, one, just like we talk about with Foster Moreau, the tight end, he's got the chemistry, the familiarity, all of that with Derek Carr. He's lined up a ton on the outside and on the inside on both the strong and weak sides of offenses in that Las Vegas Raiders offensive scheme with Derek Carr, which is very similar to the New Orleans Saints are running. Just the language is different. He's a guy that has run a ton of different routes. He has a lot of success in those spots as well when he's in an offense that supports that. The issue is, can he solidify the hands a little bit? And you're asking the same question about A.T. Perry, who had a lot of focus drops coming out of Wake Forest, but still had 120 plus catches in each of the last 2 seasons. So not enough to be super concerned when he was getting the volume, but he's not going to have that kind of volume here, at least not right away. The big thing for him is, can he win the 50-50 balls? Because he's got to take the 50-50 opportunities and at least turn them into 55-45, right? He's got to give you that advantage. And so I'm really interested to see A.T. Perry when the pads come on in particular, and the game feels a little bit more like the game as opposed to when they're out there in pajamas and helmets. And I think that's the big thing. I think oftentimes we think about the helmet or the pads going on being an advantage to the defensive guys, but it brings the offensive guys back to, okay, this is what it's like to play football as opposed to, Turkey Day football or whatever. And so I think that's a big opportunity for him as well once the pads go on. So those are the 2 that I'll really, really be watching once we begin, but I'm ready to be surprised by some of these other guys as well, especially Shaq Davis, the undrafted free agent out of South Carolina State University, but he's one of those like Emmanuel Butler types. He could be the camp star that doesn't make the roster if he can't show you what he can do on special teams.
Well, the thing that's interesting to me is these undrafted free agents and James Washington, let's say as an example, or even Brian Edwards, like they can kind of cook a little bit during training camp, and the Saints can say, you know what, we can cut him and we can sneak him through, sign him to the practice spot. It'll be okay. But when you have a drafted guy like Perry, he's basically first preseason game, Ross, he catches 2 passes for 50 yards and a touchdown. He's basically uncuttable. Because a team will say he's a draft pick. If the Saints cut him, we're taking a look at him. So that's where I think it's most interesting to me with Perry is he's just one of those guys because he's a rookie and teams will take another chance on him. He's really one of those when we talk about you can't snake him through waivers and fans, we're 90% of the time. You definitely can. He's one of the guys you can't. So I'm just really interested. Like, I'm serious. Like first preseason game, he has even a moderately interesting game. Just pencil it in. Just be like, Penn, he's on the roster.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's what, like I mentioned earlier, like A.T. Perry probably makes you keep an extra wide receiver. Like if he starts out really well, and then you have, let's say Brian Edwards performs extremely well, and you have a guy like Lynn Bowden who kind of serves two positions on one roster spot, or maybe even Kirk Merritt, same thing. He's working with the running backs all off season. We'll see if that changes when they actually have the full number of running backs, because Benjamin wasn't participating, Kendra Miller wasn't participating, Alvin Kamara wasn't participating, all that, at least during OTAs. And then so you look at A.T. Perry as a guy that's like, okay, well, A.T. Perry could be the difference between the Saints keeping a fifth wide receiver or a sixth wide receiver, depending upon what the classification is for, a guy like Kirk Merritt or a guy like Lynn Bowden. And so I do think that he's one of those guys that like changes the fabric of your roster if he and one of those veterans each have like excellent training camps and excellent preseason showings. And that's potentially a good thing. This is a team that has gone into seasons oftentimes with either 4 or 5 wide receivers, and it's turned around and bitten them in the butt within the first 3 weeks in a couple of occasions, especially last year when you had both Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry go down in that week 3 game against the Carolina Panthers. And so I think that becomes a big piece of it, in addition to how you utilize the practice squad.
I'm going to make a crazy prediction. I think
Please.
The Saints are going to be so good and so deep at wide receiver. They're going to flip one of these wide receivers for like a conditional 7th.
Instead of the roster cut. Yeah.
Instead of the roster cut. Cause you're going to have some team that's going to have injuries and they're going to be like, we got to get a body in here. Yep. And their Saints are going to flip one of these receivers, James Washington, whoever, for like a conditional 7th. There won't be anything, but that's where they are. But you mentioned another guy, and I want to say it's the Saints' first win of 2023, Foster Moreau.
Yeah.
Cancer free, which is just freaking
incredible.
Just freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And because you are one of these people, you're so good, and you watch more tape than me. I admit, I watched the tape, but I gave it up years ago because it hurts my brain, and I feel like my thing is jokes, and I don't need the tapes I don't need the tapes to clutter up my jokes.
Getting in the way of my brand tapes.
It's right. Yeah. It's like the brand, because then I think of it, and I don't think of jokes first. I'm like, well, they were when I watch them, well, they running this, and I'm like, no. I need ignorance, and I just need to make the joke, But I do think this, as far as my limited tape watching, and this is why I think Foster Moreau is such a good signing, Ross. And you can feel free to blow it out the water, but I really think that if the Saints are doing well, and it's going like we think it can, because the schedule is crummy and the NFC South is terrible, the NFC is kind of terrible. If it's going really well and it's going like we envision it, the Saints are going to be hitting these shot plays. Olave. Maybe not Michael Thomas as much, but you have a lot of it. You have Shaheed, you have Juwan Johnson in the seam, and you're going to have these teams you're going to have the Saints hitting these shot plays. And I think what teams are going to do is they're going to get tired of that very quickly. And their solution is going to be, Derek Carr, you're averaging 35 yards a touchdown the last 3 weeks. You know what, buddy? We're playing cover 2. We are not going to let you. We're not letting Olave beat us over the top like Tampa did 2 weeks before. That's not happening anymore. And I think teams are going to go to cover 2. But Foster Moreau, he's not going to be a featured guy. But what he is he's going to be Pete's ability is to say, you go to cover 2. Guess what, buddy? 12 personnel is coming at you.
Yeah.
And you got a choice. You either try to guard our tight ends with a corner or with a smaller safety, and we're going to beat you that way up the seam. Or you're going to go light in the secondary. You're going to play 5-6 defensive back. Guess what? You're getting a mouthful of this running game, which the Saints kind of want to do. And I think that's going to be my interesting point of view. And that's why I love the Foster Moreau is fantastic. But I wonder, what do you think of my theory? And what do you think of his season? How do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that's exactly the thing that you want to challenge these defenses to do. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many of these offenses go and make sure that they're too deep at running back. Mm-hmm. And it's not just because they want the committee style of having the scat back and the power back. they want to be able to say, okay, well, if you're doing that, then we can do this. And so when these defenses do that and they shift to bringing up the 2 high safeties, or they go to these nickel packages and things like that, which the Saints averaged 4.9 yards per carry last year against nickel coverages. That was a big thing, or excuse me, against nickel. And then I think it was like 5+ against dime, which they didn't see very often, especially with the injuries at wide receiver. But when they saw light boxes, they were able to do it. They didn't see it a ton, but when they saw it, they were able to win. And so I think that you'll see a lot more of that if teams are doing it. But now, not only do you have Alvin Kamara that you'll be able to go to for some number of games potentially in 2023, but Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams, who, if you're going to have a light box, what better running back to hand the ball over to than Jamal Williams? You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of different ways they could go against all that. And then similarly, one of the reasons why I like your thoughts around Foster Moreau is that all go specials back. Everybody's got their landmarks. You know what I mean? Where does this, and then you have a guy that can see that, a guy that can read that in Derek Carr and understand, okay, that safety is leveraging towards the outside. So the seam's wide open, to a guy that I have thrown this pass to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in Foster Moreau. And don't get it twisted. Juwan Johnson's right there as a part of it too. So everything's there. Can they execute it? We'll have to see on the field. But in terms of what we're looking at, it makes a lot of sense. I think that Foster Moreau's season is one that probably hovers into the, I would go so far as to say 40 or so catches on the season.
I like that.
It can hover there. That would be a higher volume than the Saints have targeted tight ends in a long time, though, because you have to wonder, where's Juwan Johnson? In that case, the guy who caught, 50 plus balls last year. He had it was 508 yards. I think it was around 40 something catches,
7 touchdowns.
Catches. Yeah. And so, you have to wonder, okay, so where's Juwan Johnson in that? But the targets are going to be there if this team does what we can look at the New Orleans Saints offseason moves and say that they're trying to do, which is they want to throw the damn ball. Like, they want to be able to do it. So if you're gonna strap up, and if you're gonna build, add all these weapons, and if you're gonna put yourself in a situation to do it, then you might as well do it, right? So I think that that's a place where you could see that. So 30, 40 catches for Foster Moreau, but his ability as an additional, run blocker, his ability as an additional pass blocker, those are going to be things that are continue to highlight in his game as well. And because he can do that, he's going to get on the field. And remember, when the Saints drafted Adam Troutman a couple of years ago, the first thing that Sean Payton said was, we want to get more 12 personnel out there. Well, Pete Carmichael's still the OC. He still wants to be able to utilize that 12 personnel as well. And even when he's not, getting one of those pass catching tight ends out there in 11 personnel, where you have the 3 wide receivers and you've got 3, you got a 3-by-1 set, so you got 2 receivers and a tight end on one side. You have your weekend or your split end weak side wide receiver on his lonesome. And then you have that tight end that crosses the middle of the field to hit that hash mark and that landmark over on the opposite side. Those are the things the Saints want to see back in their offense, and they're better equipped now to do it than they have been, probably, especially at tight end. Since, is it fair to say since Jimmy Graham? You think about like Kobe Fleener, Michael Hall,
Ben Watson had that crazy year where he set career highs.
Yeah, maybe that.
I'm bullish on Juwan Johnson, and I know the fantasy guys are like, oh, they have TD regression, but this one thing, it just sticks out. And I think it might have been, even you mentioned it on Locked on Saints, or maybe it was something you had wrote, but it just struck me with Juwan Johnson. It was like, he would work so hard. He's like helping the Saints training staff, like pick up clothes in the locker room. Yeah. And I was just like, that's a level of commitment that he's like, I'm never going back. Yeah. I am going to do whatever it takes to stay in this league. And I just think he's a guy, I don't know what it's going to be, but he's going to have something new this year. He's going to be one of these guys that's going to add something. And I think he's going to go up a level, not a Pro Bowl or whatever, but he's going to take the next step with this offense. But a couple more questions for you is, before we get to sort of a season, sort of not a prediction, but an outlook, is when you look at this defense, if I told you, because I know you're high on Alontae Taylor, we are, the secondary is really interesting, but I think a guy that I'm fascinated with is Carl Granderson. Yeah. In that last year, Davenport was kind of so bad that you looked up and you were like, they're not playing Davenport. They're playing Granderson all the time. And he's added this weight, and his pass rushing maybe has not progressed like you thought, but he's holding up against the run, which is number one thing for Dennis Allen. You better, Dennis Allen, if you don't set the edge, you're not playing. So you just looked up and we were looking at snap counts. I'm like, Granderson's playing all the time. So I just look at this defense. We talk about Alontae Taylor breaking out, but I look at Granderson as my sort of breakout guy, and he can, because listen, in the NFL, every sack you get is $1 million. So if he gets 5, 6, 7, 8 sacks, he's hitting free agency. He's going to get $8-9 million a year in free agency. That's just how it works. Look at Caden Ellis. He had 7 sacks, 4 of them against 2 teams with horrible offensive lines. He got $7 million a year from Atlanta, right? So, but he's sort of my breakout guy on defense. Who's your guy that you think is going to take that next step on defense? Yeah.
Let me say real quick, the Juwan Johnson report of him helping the equipment staff pick up. It was a Nick article. Nick wrote that.
Okay.
And everything. I wanted to double check because I had read the same thing, but I was like, I don't remember who wrote it, but it was Nick. And the funny thing about the idea of, like, we used to talk about how, 1 sack equals $1 billion. What does that mean for Marcus Davenport, who had a half sack and got $14 million?
I don't know.
Each sack is $2 million for this.
The exception proves the rule.
Exactly right. Yeah, because we look at that and we go, "What is happening?"
You know what it is? I watched the 2019. Or was it? Or it was the 2019 Saints-Vikings game, I think.
Yeah.
2018. Marcus Davenport had like 2 amazing plays.
Yeah, and then it was just they were just burnt into
Minnesota. The personnel guys had. But go ahead.
Yeah. So my kind of breakout guy that I'm looking at this year, I don't know if it counts. It's hard to say because there's so many of these really good starters that are already there, right? You're not going to call Marshawn Lattimore, Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu breakout guys. Same thing for Pete Werner, Demario Davis. So Carl Granderson is really at the top of my list. Alontae Taylor can be there if he wins that role for sure. But I'm really interested to see what happens with DeMarco Jackson, the Saints' 5th round pick linebacker from a draft class ago who missed his rookie season, and he's coming in this year. He's legitimately right now, unless they bring in a veteran, which we know the Saints love to bring in linebacker veterans, Nigel Bradham, James Laurinaitis, like they've done this year after year. Yeah, there's some names for you.
Dan Morgan, like twice.
Right. Yeah, don't let me go down the list of veteran running backs they brought in. Shane Vereen and Mike Gillislee and all these other guys. But assuming that they don't do that, or assuming he continues to perform, like he's the guy right now. I'll say this very specifically, behind Demario Davis and Pete Werner. The guy beside Demario Davis and Pete Werner right now is Zach Bond, the guy that's playing the 3rd linebacker, strong safety role. But DeMarco Jackson's getting the green dot on the helmet. He's got the communication device. He's doing all the setup. He's doing the play call, not the play calling, but, calling the shots and things like that for the defense. When it comes to mini camps, OTAs, I think that will carry over into training camp. So if he ends up being somebody that just gets that role and is solidly that guy, it might be a little bit hard to keep him off the field if he really proves that. Because, and the reason why I mentioned that is because he could be that Caden Ellis type that you leverage as a supplementary 2nd level pass rusher. He was a massively productive on ball guy at App State. He was the guy that was see ball, go after the ball. He was there to stop the run. He was there to rush the passer, all of those things. And then now he's showing you what he can do in coverage. He's got to stop the feet shuffling a little bit. Mike Detillier talked about that not too long ago. And so I think that there's like a little bit of those things you want to see improve. But if he becomes a guy that shows you all of that, him and Zach Bond end up kind of splitting some snaps situationally, depending upon what it is that the Saints are wanting to do in any game situation. And that could elevate his role as being a supplementary guy as opposed to just a reserve guy. And I think that that's where he has the opportunity to really have a breakout. So in addition to a guy like Carl Granderson, who it's all right there in front of him, he was arguably the Saints' best run defender last year, even scored higher than Cam in those, in those situations. I think that that's one of those big pieces to where he's got everything ready for him to be able to do it. He should be the guy to get the first snap opposite Cam Jordan week 1 at the edge rusher position. So I think that he's solidly set to break out as a starter. Alontae Taylor could be that guy as well. But then the other guy that's kind of in that mix, I think, is DeMarco Jackson.
Yeah. And the interesting thing with me for the Saints is the struggle, which we'll get to Dennis Allen, the season in just a second. But to me, last year, he was as impressive as he's ever been as a defensive coordinator, because you look at what the Saints did. They had no pass rush, none. Right. And Dennis Allen was just like, oh, I got no pass rush. Davenport's terrible. It's not, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to blitz linebackers. We're going to use both of them. And Caden Ellis, you're not going to know if he's coming. You're not going to know if the other linebacker's coming. And it worked. And the Saints are top 5 in sacks. And you look like, how is this possible? So I just think maybe his finest job as defensive coordinator. And oh, by the way, he sort of took the reins from the defense. I mean, because you look, Richards and Ryan Nielsen, they kind of, the Saints kind of like let them both go, and he took the reins back because he wasn't going how he wanted it to go. Right. So, which that leads me to my final question, and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong. I believe the 2023 Saints, Ross Jackson, have absolutely no excuses to win. And I'm going to tell you why, because they can't even use injuries again as an excuse, because if they get injured again and the injury plague, which we mentioned at the top of the show, if it doesn't lift, well, then you got to say, listen, we've had this roster. It's been injured for 3 years in a row.
Right.
We got to get new players because they can't stay healthy. So to me, the injuries isn't an excuse. So if they do not get this done and are not a 10-win team and a playoff team, I think serious changes have to be put in, maybe not firing coaches, but this roster, they got to look at it, because eventually if you go 3 years without making the playoffs and you're injured again or whatever, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. That's insanity. So I believe the Saints have no excuses for 2023. Where do you sit on the expectations for the Saints in 2023? And then I'll let you get out of here.
No, you're good. Ralph, do you remember the movie Holes? It's like an old Disney movie with Shia LaBeouf.
Vaguely.
There was a character in that movie called Sam. And Sam was a guy to where every time that somebody would say something, he would say, I can fix that. That was kind of his line. That's kind of who Dennis Allen was last year with the defense. You know,
that's right.
Oh, we can't get a pass rush right now because, you know, we're not getting it. We're not generating with the front four. I can fix that. Oh, we're not getting any turnovers, so we need to keep points off the board. I can fix that. Oh, we have an injured quarterback, and we've had quarterback injuries. What did they have? Like five new starting quarterbacks in the last 2 years. I can fix that. He went out and got a guy who's missed two games due to injury over the course of his entire career, with the exception of the 2 games in which the Raiders effectively gave up on him out loud last year. So I think that's where I look at Dennis Allen, is that he's done a lot of the I can fix that. He's done a lot of the repairs, right? The wide receiver room, like we just talked about, like what a massively improved room. The tight end room is massively improved this year. The running back room is massively improved this year. So it's all there. And so I completely agree. You've done all the fixes. You've seen all of the things that this team has struggled to be able to do. Started a record number of starters 2 years ago. They've had a record number of injuries, I'm sure, over the last 2 years. No way they haven't, outside of like a couple of body bag seasons that the team's had. But goodness gracious. And so I think you have to look at this team and say, okay, you've improved the roster to the best of your ability. You've filled holes. That's where the defensive line question mark kind of comes in. David Onyemata left. Malcolm Roach is still here. Shai Tuttle left. Kentavious Street left. Marcus Davenport left. But I think you did a good job addressing those positions, bringing in guys like Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard, who's top 10 in pass rush win rate last year at his position, meaning one-on-one opportunities he's been winning. That's basically what you're looking for. They add the number 1 overall recruit in his recruiting class in Brian Brzee, who I know didn't have the college career that he that people expected, but context matters in terms of why, with injury, family stuff, all the things that he kind of had to battle throughout all that. Marcus Davenport leaves, you'll lose a half sack. Oh my God, what are you going to do? But you bring in a guy that's got like 26 of them things over the course of the past 2 years, and Isaiah Foskey. So they've done a good job of addressing things on paper, right? Here's the on paper. That's right. Here it comes. And so now the biggest thing is, can you execute? And I think effectively when the Saints said Pete Carmichael is the offensive coordinator again in 2023, making a change at quarterback and continuing to revamp literally the rest of the coaching staff almost, that you effectively said that your issues on offense were execution based, not play calling, not strictly play calling based. There were clear things in play calling. Bad trends on 2nd and 10, not getting players out on the field in key game situations. Think back to that Tampa Bay Buccaneers lead and stuff like that, if you dare, all those things. But other than that, like, they've addressed everything that they felt was an issue. And now you add in the fact that Dennis Allen's got his staff. He's got a DC that he trusts, one DC, one voice, which is his now. And then you have a guy in Joe Woods, as opposed to three different guys kind of trying to do the same job here, or some piece of the same job. You bring in a guy like Todd Grantham, who wants to help. The reason why they brought in Todd Grantham, that's another one. It's where they said, okay, we're weak against rushing quarterbacks or dual threat quarterbacks. Let's bring in somebody from the collegiate ranks who can create an attacking defensive line that has experience in stopping mobile quarterbacks in the SEC. Todd Grantham. That was the whole point of hiring him. So you've seen them say, okay, cause, effect. So yeah, I agree. There's no excuse if this doesn't work. And even if the injury set in, like you mentioned, then at that point you have to look at you got to pull a full Pelicans at that point and say, okay,
oh Lord,
the health staff, all this is like you would have to make that decision, but you have to see how 2023 goes there. So to me, this should be a team that wins its division. This should be a 10-win team. Especially in a 17-game season and a weak schedule. That's either the weakest when you look at last year's win-loss projection or win-loss rankings, or second weakest schedule when you look at the projected win-loss rankings when it comes to teams. So no excuse at this point, especially with a talented roster that they have and a lot of leaders still on this roster. And you got your quarterback. That might be the biggest thing.
Yeah.
When they went after Deshaun Watson last year, and like you mentioned earlier, that conversation's a whole other thing. But when they didn't get him and then they fell back on Jameis Winston, the first thing that I said was, okay, that means Dennis Allen gets a second year, no matter how poorly.
Yeah. Interesting thought. Yeah. No,
you know what I mean?
No, that's a great point. And listen, the Saints, other teams were kind of lukewarm on Derek Carr. You know, the Jets were like, yeah, you can win the Super Bowl. We're going to win on Aaron Rodgers. Carolina kind of.
What a wild sentence. We think he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback, but we're
going to win. You can, if you come
Lord.
to the Jets,
way to tell on yourself.
You can win the Super Bowl and be in Canton, but we're not going to sign you.
No,
right.
No.
So, and Dennis Allen, they made no bones about it from the jump. They were like, Derek Carr is the guy we want. They rolled out the carpet for him. So I think they're just joined at the hip.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say this. This year, I am so excited for this year for you in particular. Locked On is just, it's incredible. And I just want,
thank you, man.
I want you to tell the people like how gratifying is it? You've worked so hard at it. And because not all, like Locked On is a great network, but they ain't all the same. And what you do with the Saints, it's so amazing. I feel like you and Underhill, the way the Saints are covered now is so incredible. And you put it on, I think you tweeted the other day, you're like, what off season in the ranking for Locked On was like 20 up. The appetite for Saints content, it is insatiable. Like I was thinking that this year, they didn't win last year, first time in a while. I was like, it's going to slow down a little bit. People aren't going to be, like the appetite for Saints fans all around, Ross, for content is incredible. And I just want you to speak on how proud you are of what Locked On has become in your time, where I think it's to me, it's you, Underhill are like the flagship of like what is happening. And you got, us over here, we're doing our bits and jokes and drinking and all. But as far as like information and actual media, y'all are sort of the flagship. But I just want, to your own horn, I want you to talk about like what you've built and Locked On. Cause I think people, we just take it for granted. We're like, oh, we got Ross. He's amazing there. And he's turning out this incredible podcast. Like, talk about your journey just in Locked On and when you started and how you got it here before we get out of here.
Yeah, I can't lay my own journey down without thanking Nick. And there's other folks too. I mean, but it's, I'll use Derek Carr's phrase that like, if I went through and I named somebody would be upset that I didn't name them. So I'm not going to worry about it. But like folks like him and Kat and Amy, who used to be here, who's now back home in Nebraska. And I'm so happy for her for that. I've just been so remarkably influential. But when I watched Nick leave and then come back, and the way that he was received by the New Orleans Saints fan base and the passion that he showed for the city that he's not even from, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it is his city, right? Like that.
Mhm.
It's kind of the way that Cam Jordan talks about it. Cam Jordan talks about New Orleans as his home, even though he's not from here. And and that's the impact that New Orleans has on you, is that you don't have to be from here to be from here. That's just not the way that it works.
Once you decide I'm from New Orleans and you love it, New Orleans just loves you back. That's it.
That's it. You know what I mean? And so I watched what Nick did, and Nick has been so remarkably helpful in giving me advice and giving me feedback and helping me out and helping me understand how to operate within. I don't have any media training. You know what I mean? Like I didn't go to college. I went to college for theater, Ralph. I have 2 fake degrees.
Wow.
2 very fake degrees.
I want you to do like, or is it like classic theater? Could you do like a Locked On Shakespeare themed Saints podcast?
If I really sat down and instead of doing like film work for a couple of hours and I did iambic pentameter for a couple of hours, then yes, maybe.
I'm going to start a GoFundMe. We want Ross Jackson, Shakespeare, Locked On Saints.
Locked on thou Saints.
That's right. Tell us what we need to do to make this happen. I will use all my powers to make it happen. But keep going.
No, you're good. So but I had like started in like the performance side, and then I moved over to the management side, and I've done everything from I stage managed on Broadway, off Broadway, national tours, international, all this other stuff, and then I left all of it. And after 12 years of building a career doing shows like Wicked and Book of Mormon and Peter and the Starcatcher and stuff like that, and being a producing, artistic, what do they call me? Artistic producer at like one of LA's and therefore the country's largest theaters. I left it to do this and to come back home and to do this. And the reason why I had the courage to do that is because of Nick. Because I watched Nick do it and I said, they'll take care of me. They'll love me because I love them. I don't have anything to lose here. And well, I did have stuff to lose here, but that's personal. That's personal life stuff. But then I was able to come back and do all that. And since I've been back home, like this podcast has just grown and grown and grown and grown because, the Saints have been so accommodating to me. They've allowed me to be a part of everything going on as a fully credentialed media member and all these other things, which means I can give some information that I think matches my brand and things like that, so I can bring things to the table that I wasn't able to bring before. So I've only grown over the course of this time. And if it wasn't for people just making a decision to let me be 25 to 30 minutes of their day each day, I would never get that opportunity, which means for me, I have to provide the top notch thing that I can, the best that I can, you know what I mean? And so I try remarkably hard to do that, but I follow that example from a guy like Nick and from everybody else that's, taking that. I mean, you guys have had me on several times and you guys have, supported me and everything. And like, if people are going to do that, I have to give my best. I want to give my best because of that. So I'm grateful for that. The podcast has grown. We've done so much, I've continued to grow as a writer as well too. So my thing is that like, wherever there are people, I want to bring them content. So that's why I've got a Blue Sky account, I got
the Blue Sky threads.
That's why I have all of it.
I need them to have a meeting and just tell me what's going to be. Is Twitter going to make it, or are we going to do a replacement? Tell us where to go.
Just be straight up. Yeah, just be straight up.
Just tell me where to go, and I'll be fine. But my thing and final thing for me is I just believe that the Saints community, the podcast community, I think we're all great and we help each other. We should share, just retweet stuff. But I think mostly is what Saints fans want is if you're authentic and you and they don't care if you are honest about the Saints, but they want to know. And I think especially for our podcast, they know we care about the Saints as much as they do. And you do too. And listen, if the Saints stink, we're gonna say it. We're gonna be like, this is not good. When last year, there's at moments we're like, this is not good. We haven't seen
I remember opening a show right after the game and being like, it's one thing for the New Orleans Saints to be bad, it's another thing for them to be bad and boring. We got all that in a little bit of land for you. Like it was bad last year, man.
But that's what people want, and they want it
tell the truth.
And on the flip side though, is once they know that, then I know they're like me, where I'm like, the Saints just stomped the Raiders out I'm like, the drive today is going to be amazing. I get to listen to Ross. I get like to say, I am so excited to listen to when they win. So I just, guys, you know, I can't thank you enough, Ross, for giving us time. And you've been amazing. And
thank you.
I cannot wait. Like, I think this year is going to be so interesting. And I think it's going to be so much fun to cover this team.
Yeah.
And Derek Carr. I just think this team's got a lot of personality. I think Dennis Allen's kind of found his way, more comfortable as a head coach. I think this year is going to be, regular season is going to be on the level of fun of 2018, where you're going to have Jamal Williams, you're going to have Cam Jordan, and you're going to have,
big one for me, man.
You know, like, I just think there's going to be post-game shows where you had Ingram and Kamara doing their comedy routine, and it was just a party. And we won't talk about the ending, but I just think that's what that's what 2023 is going to be.
Yeah.
And I can't wait. Like Locked On, I can't wait for 2 a days, guys. You know where to find him. Locked On Saints. It's the #1 Saints podcast in the world. Ross, thanks for joining us, guy. I appreciate it. Tell people, do you need to plug anything? Do you need to plug any social media accounts that you're trying to build, because we're scared that Twitter is going to fade away? Do you need to plug anything before we get out of here?
This has become such a task now, thanks to Twitter. Like, when the radio, when you do a radio hit and they're like, all right, well, tell us where to find your stuff. You're like, I don't know. So here's what I did. If there's a social media platform, Ross Jackson NOLA is on it.
There you go.
It's all brand aligned. You know, it's the same profile picture on every single account.
There you go.
It's the same handle in every account, and everything is going on there. But most of all, man, I really hope that, you know, people continue to head over to the Patreon and support these guys, support Saints Happy Hour, support Andrew, support Ralph, support the team, because y'all are incredible and have been, you know, massive supporters and just remarkably kind to me for like no reason at all. And I'm so grateful for you guys. So beyond anything having to do with any of my stuff, you're here. Continue to support these guys.
Well, I'm telling you this, we're trying to plan a live show. We got a venue. We're going to have tickets, and we're going to do it sometime during the year. I'm going to rope you. I'm going to rope you in, and you're going to go. We're going to do it. We did a live event last year, and it was ridiculous. We're doing it again. But guys, thanks for joining us. Find Ross Jackson wherever you get your social media. You know where he is. He's Locked On Saints, and I'm Ralph Marlborough. Thanks for joining us. Support Ross. Support us. SaintsHappyHour.com. And until next time, the bar is closed.